Hello and welcome back to the Biochemistry for Health Sciences channel. In today's video, we shall discuss intracellular receptors. In the previous videos, we discussed various types of receptors. We started off with ligand-gated ion channel receptor, G-protein coupled receptor, and then enzyme-linked receptors. Today, we'll look at intracellular receptors and we'll look at two examples, the glucocorticoid receptor as well as the thyroid receptor. As the name suggests, intracellular receptors are found inside the cell, mostly either in the cytoplasm or the nucleus, compared to the previous receptors we talked about, which were found on the plasma membrane. So unlike the previous receptors, these receptors are intracellular. Let's first look at the glucocorticoid receptor, whose signal is the hormone cortisol. We discussed cortisol under starvation in a previous video, so we'll have a quick recap about how cortisol carries out its cell signaling. Now, cortisol is a steroid. It's not very water soluble. So in the bloodstream, it will exist mostly in the bound form to some sort of protein. In case of cortisol, one of the major proteins that binds cortisol is called CBG, or corticosteroid binding globulin. So most of the cortisol will exist in the bound form, but it's always going to be a little bit that's going to be water soluble. That's going to be the free form or the unbound form. So cortisol from the bloodstream will diffuse out of the blood vessels and enter a cell. If there is a receptor present for cortisol, then the cortisol will bind to the receptor. Otherwise, it will simply come out. So the cortisol will bind the receptor here, shown in blue, that's a glucocorticoid receptor, which is normally bound to a protein HSP90. But when cortisol binds to the receptor, this HSP90 is dissociated from the receptor, and now the cortisol receptor forms a complex. This complex is a transcription factor. It will now enter the nucleus and bind to DNA. So those DNA sequences recognized by the glucocorticoid receptor, they are called glucocorticoid responsive element, or GRE. And once this receptor signal binds the DNA to the GRE, the certain genes will be transcribed, and that transcription of the genes will lead to the actions of cortisol, such as its ability to manage stress. It changes metabolism that we talked about previously, affects gluconeogenesis, breakdown of proteins, breakdown of lipids. Cortisol will also affect blood pressure, as well as has a very important influence on our immune system. Another example of a intracellular receptor is the thyroid receptor, which responds to the thyroid hormones T3 and T4. Like the cortisol signal, thyroid hormones are also not water soluble, not very water soluble. So they too will be bound mostly to protein, especially to this protein here called thyroxine binding globulin, or TBG. And the free forms will be the ones that will diffuse and then transported by special transport proteins called thyroid hormone transporters. And then these T4 as well as T3 will enter the cytoplasm. In the cytoplasm, T4 will be converted to T3 by enzymes called deiodinases. The T3 will then diffuse into the nucleus, where it binds the thyroid receptor to form a thyroid receptor T3 complex, which acts as a transcription factor. And this complex will now bind DNA at sequences called thyroid responsive elements, or TREs. And this binding, once again, just like cortisol, will lead to transcription of various genes that will then cause the actions of the thyroid hormones, such as growth, development, and several other outcomes that thyroid hormones perform. So this binding to DNA, this is called the genomic mechanism of thyroid signaling. Thyroid hormones also have a non-genomic mechanism, and here the T4 and T3 actually bind this protein, this transmembrane protein called integrin. And binding of this integrin will trigger certain pathways, such as the MAPK pathways, that will affect several proteins in the cell. Other examples of intracellular receptors that we'll come across in future videos include the other steroid hormones, such as aldosterone, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and so on, that are involved in sexual development as well as other functions. And then we have vitamin D, that binds vitamin D receptor, that's involved in bone formation, immunity, cell growth, as well as differentiation. So that's all for receptors. Until the next video, thank you very much for supporting this channel. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.